Good morning, everyone. Clearly, the mic is on. I'm keen to get started. My name is Stephen Blockmans. I'm a senior fellow at ICDS and have had a hand in co-organizing this event together with colleagues at the MFA who are also present in the room. We have today a slightly changed program for this particular panel, which deals with the notion of gradual integration, promise and limits, or is it peril? I don't know. We have a little change in the program in that Drita Abdiohalili from the Secretariat of the Chief Negotiator of North Macedonia has fallen ill and cannot join us. Luckily, we have enough firepower in the room to make up for that, and I intend to call on you, so don't get too comfortable. Now, and we have, of course, a formidable trio of panelists to kick us off with the debate. We have, to my immediate left, Mirna Vlašić, who is currently Minister Plenipotentiary at the Croatian Embassy to Sweden, and before that, running the Ministry of Foreign Affairs project in granting technical advice to neighboring countries on how to conduct accession talks, prepare for them, etc., building up on the experience gathered, of course, in the office of the Chief Negotiator of Croatia, as we know, the most recent member state or candidate country to become a member state. Next to her, Thomas Hagleitner, who is head of unit for Western Balkans policy and regional strategy at DG NEAR of the European Commission. And last but not least, Maryna Rabinovych, postdoctoral researcher currently at the University of Agder in Kristiansand, Norway, and also at the Kyiv School of Economics. So welcome to all three of you. Perhaps by way of introductory remarks, and we already heard a couple of references in the first panel to the notions of stage accession, gradual integration, etc. In the past couple of years, there's been a lot, mostly loose talk about these notions. And so I think it's helpful at the outset to offer some semantic clarification. We've seen the notion of gradual integration come up in the European Council conclusions of June 2022, which in a way already banked on previous European Commission communications, including the February 2020 revised methodology, and which now introduces a new term, accelerated integration, in the latest enlargement package. The European Council last year in June called on the Commission, the Council, the High Representative to advance the notion of gradual integration already during ongoing membership talks in a reversible and merit-based way. And I think that is crucial elements for what we'll be talking about. So the notion of accelerated integration, to my mind, is the overarching term, which could, terminologically, of course, get different expressions. It could be structured in a gradual manner, meaning that in an incremental fashion, candidate countries come closer to the European Union as they align with the acquis or other preconditions that are being set. But it could also be staged, meaning following an approach through which clearly benchmarked levels of adherence across the board of all chapters, all negotiating chapters, lead to the release of financial benefits, or indeed lead to further participation of candidate countries in the institutional architecture of the EU. This is what, as one of the authors of the stage accession process, of the stage accession model, we've always advocated a horizontal approach. the way I see accelerated integration now being proposed by the European Commission in the enlargement package is rather partial in nature. It follows a policy or a sectoral approach into what are now 7 initial priority areas of the single market, linked to extensive ex-ante conditionality of rule of law nature, socioeconomic, but also geopolitical nature, you could say, when referring to Serbia and Kosovo and the need to normalize their relations. So that's a cluster of notions that we should talk about. I think for now, accelerated integration is the go-to term, but then we need to be careful in which way it gets its expression. This is to be set aside from the notion of differentiated integration, which applies to member states wanting to advance their cooperation in line with the objectives of the treaties, using the EU institutions to form a closer form of higher level commitments, as we know they exist for the Eurozone, for the Schengen area, for PESCO, permanent structured cooperation in defense, for example. Now, accelerated integration can get a substantive policy dimension to it, but also an institutional one, right? So apart from the 7 areas of the single market which have been marked out now, that might come with a more gradual participation of pre-accession states in the EU bodies and or institutions, and also that has been referred to earlier. Okay, now, if one takes the enlargement package of November 8th, one actually has to skim through quite a bit of text. I mean, there's roughly 1,500 pages of package to be consumed. The main communication, which is no longer called a strategy, entails some elements which are fleshed out essentially in a growth plan, a proposed growth plan for the Western Balkans. That is where, in that undergrowth of the policy documents, where you will find notions which give expression and operationalize the notion of accelerated integration. So it's a bit hidden, perhaps. It seems only applicable to the Western Balkans. And obviously, Thomas, we would like to understand first a little bit better what the European Commission has proposed in this particular context, what objectives it wants to reach, the methodology it wants to apply, before we can discuss some other elements of it. So with that, please enlighten us.
Yeah, thank you very much, Stephen, and thank you very much for being here in Tallinn, in Estonia. Always good to be reminded what enlargement means in practice and the success it really is. Before I get to your just more technical remarks, I mean, let me just recall we are also in an interesting year, if you look at it in terms of enlargement. I mean, if we have these coincidences of anniversaries, 50 years of the first enlargement, we have 30 years of the Copenhagen criteria, we have 20 years of the Thessaloniki summit with the European perspective for the Western Balkans. We have 10 years since the last accession. It was against this backdrop that also we presented this year's enlargement package, which I had the pleasure to coordinate. Now, Stephen, to try and unpick a bit what you said and focus on gradual integration. Let me a bit explain the reasoning and where we've been coming from. And one starting point for us, in fact, has been the economy. The economic, looking at the economic convergence of candidate countries and potential candidates, or better, the lack of such convergence over the last years. We are sort of at an average between 35 to 50%. 50 is Montenegro in GDP per capita of EU 27. That's where the enlargement countries currently are. And it hasn't moved. The curve has been flat over the last years. Now that's a problem. That's a problem, obviously, for the countries, the citizens there, but it's also a problem for the EU in the future of having new member states that are at that level of GDP per capita. So that has been one reflection of why we think we need to do something in this regard. We've had a second reflection to say, and the term has been used already here, level playing field, and this brings us more to the institutional setup. We now have a situation, if you look at the enlargement countries, both in the East and in the Western Balkans, that we have a very different contractual setup in the relations between the EU and those countries. In the case of Ukraine, Moldova, and Georgia, we have the so-called deep and comprehensive free trade agreements, which initially were meant as an alternative to enlargement, but which are provide a lot of potential for integration into the EU single market. Very important elements. In the case of the Western Balkans, we have fairly old-style stabilization and association agreements, old style in the sense they're classic free trade agreements with an element of political dialogue attached to it. And they were meant as stepping stones for enlargement when they were negotiated. Now that worked in the case of Croatia. Now with the other countries of the region, we still have the SAAs. So we need to have this level playing field, and we're trying to reduce this gap. That's sort of the second reflection we've had. Now, the third one, and this was also raised before, there is, in particular in the Western Balkans, a sense of frustration, a sense of disillusionment, and one can discuss why and where the reasons are for that. But the fact of the matter is, it is there. Now, one way of trying to overcome this is to look at the way we are doing enlargement, because in essence, the way until now we've been doing enlargement is it's everything or nothing. So we are preparing for enlargement, and upon enlargement, the full potential, all obligations, all opportunities of EU membership are available. We are trying to change this and see what are the advantages, some of the benefits of enlargement that we can already, make available prior to accession. So this is the third sort of strand of reflections that has led us to propose the growth plan, in particular now for the Western Balkans. Now, what is it that we have in mind? And as you said, the growth plan at this stage is in particular for the Western Balkans. I think it has also the political element, and this is why it's been an integral part of this year's enlargement package. Because we knew, of course, the political focus is on the East, the recommendations and well-justified recommendations have been made for Ukraine, Moldova, and Georgia. We've also made a recommendation for Bosnia and Herzegovina, albeit a conditional one. And then we have proposed the growth plan for the Western Balkans, and which is what you have mentioned before, our response as well to the calls for gradual integration from the Council. Now, what is the growth plan in essence? There are 4 strands of work that we have set out. One is, and that's the one mostly linked to the gradual integration, is that we are trying to open certain areas of the single market, and we are not talking about the full EA type model with all 4 freedoms, but specific areas of the single market where also the countries of the regions have expressed a particular interest, where they have certain competitive advantages as well, where they have particular interests from roads transport to customs facilitation to integration into raw materials and critical medicines, etc. These type of issues that have come up in the discussions with the region. So we'll try and get them into these parts of the single market. Now, this is conditional upon fulfilling the necessary technical conditions to get into this part of the single market on the one side, and in addition, and this is the second strand of work, we've also said this needs to be accompanied by stronger regional economic integration. The Western Balkans are fairly small economies. They are all trying to align to the EU acquis, EU rules and standards. We want, and they want, to be more attractive for investments. This only works if investors can also operate regionally, and this is the economic rationale of the common regional market. So we are trying to match the two. So if they move forward on common regional market integration, and then the technical work is done for integration into the single market, and we can try and work on the basis of either the existing provisions of the Stabilization Association Agreement or targeted amendments to try and integrate the countries into these parts of the single market. Now, these are the first two strands of the growth plan, and I'll very quickly now say about the other two, because we've also proposed a financial instrument for the Western Balkans, a so-called growth facility, which is modeled again in terms of the financial architecture upon the Ukraine facility that we have proposed earlier this year. The financial volume is very different. Ukraine is, we've proposed 50 billion, 1/3 of grants, 2/3 of loans. In the case of the Western Balkans, we've proposed 6 billion, again, same ratio between grants and loans. And the idea is basically to have, like we're doing now for EU member states and we'll do for Ukraine, the countries are developing reform agendas which target those reforms that are sort of the most incentivizing economic growth, because that is again what we are aiming at, economic growth on the one hand, but also those reforms that are linked to the EU accession process, to accelerate the EU accession process. So that should be part of these reform agendas. And then as for EU member states, the countries will make requests for payments upon delivery of these reforms. This will be assessed by the Commission, and then payments will be done. We've foreseen a mechanism where in these new financial instruments, which in difference to the instrument for pre-accession, which has thematic envelopes, this new facility would have country envelopes per country, and if after a certain while reforms are not being implemented, then this envelope would be redistributed amongst the other partners of the region. So that is a bit the logic of what we have proposed. It's important to bear in mind that this is a proposal. It's part of the MFF review, which will be discussed in December together with the overall enlargement package. But we are, I think, quite optimistic that member states will see the political, economic logic of having this instrument next to the Ukraine facility being adopted. And again, with the idea to try and change the dynamic also in the Western Balkans, because there is a new dynamic in terms of enlargement. It's been discussed in the previous panel. It's important that also the Western Balkans use this dynamic and to make these tangible benefits available for citizens, for business operators, which ultimately are the ones that are most keenly aware of the difficulties of operating outside and trying to outside the EU and its single market and trying to change that situation. So that was a bit of a long introduction, but just trying to explain again what are the reasons and what's the overall architecture of what we have proposed for the Western Balkans, which again has to be seen in the overall picture of what we have now for the enlargement countries also now in the East.
Thanks, Thomas. Very helpful to unpack the growth plan. I'm sure we'll come back to issues of conditionality, the size of the envelope, the operational mechanics basically of this, and also its political relevance in the region and for closing that economic gap that you started out with, which exists and has been prolonged for too long. Mirna, Croatia basically was in the pre-accession process for 10 years, right? It's exactly 10 years between membership application and entry into the European Union. Before you reflect on some of the aspects of the growth plan, I simply wanted to ask you whether during your time in the office of the chief negotiator at the MFA, there was any moment in time where you thought, this process has gone on too long, and indeed, as we heard also in the first panel, there's a need, to speed this up. If there was such a reflection, when did it come up? In what context did it come up? Meaning thematic area that you may have been discussing, and what type of accelerated integration did Croatia aspire to?
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much to the organizers for having me. Yes, absolutely. Let me just go one step back. This whole process lasted for 10 years, but it really started even in the late 1990s. And at that time when Croatia was still politically an outsider in the sense of European integration, we started with first activities that actually led us to a much better position in 2003 with extensive preparations with the whole administration and the experts to be able to do this work. When it comes to the length of the process, interesting is always to look from the political context at that time when we were applying for the membership. We just changed the government. We had a new leader of the government who was very dedicated to the fact that we want to become the EU member, and even he was from the center-right party. And at the same time, he asked for the support from the other side of the party. And therefore, in the parliament, as early as those days, we had a strong consensus that this is like a national project in itself, both politically and administratively and financially. When it comes to the length, I remember that when he came out, he was saying like, oh, we're applying and we want to become a member by 2007. And saying this, like in 4 years we will become a full-fledged member, raised really great expectations in the public, because the public thought that this is something that it's really achievable in such a short time. So therefore, this created a lot of pressure on us working on this, and also the process itself, because on many occasions, expectations were far greater than that was actually possible to achieve. The length of the process and how it was set up, interesting was that at that time, Croatia was negotiating alone when we started our accession negotiations upon our fulfillment of criteria such as full compliance and full cooperation with the ICTY. When we started negotiations, it was very... the setup was made in a way that the administration was fully set up, but at the same time, the chapters 23 and 24, which fall under fundamentals today, were actually in the final phases of the process. So we started with the single market chapters first, and then only in the later phase we dealt with 23 and 24, and this in turn, of course, created some recommendations for the future processes of accession negotiations for other countries, because we found out that, especially in the last phases of negotiations, starting these complex issues such as minority rights, freedom of media, and other issues, turned out to be really demanding. And at that point, it was really unclear how long this will take. Another really important aspect for Croatia, and Thomas knows everything about it because he was my counterpart in those days, was that we were introduced a benchmarking system, which was considered in the very first phases as really dramatic and something that will prolong the process itself further. But then we realized that it's a really good mechanism for us because it allowed us to firstly better coordinate with the Commission about the expectations, what needs to be done, what kind of preconditions need to be met, either to open or close a negotiating chapter. And there was a clear understanding and mutual respect on both sides that whatever we achieve, and if it was defined as a benchmark and we managed to fulfill this benchmark, that we're not going to get any extra requirements following that. So in that sense, I would say that this helped us a lot in terms of planning. I mean, since I was involved in this process for such a long time, I can speak about a lot about how we internally organized ourselves. But just as a one caveat, maybe for Moldova and Ukraine, when I speak to our colleagues there, is that we had our internal system of not only planning, but also following the process and also monitoring, because after chapters were provisionally closed, we needed to still continue working and fulfill the requirements. So in that sense, there were multiple layers. But I would say in terms of the support for the membership, like having such high expectations in the beginning, that cost us a bit at the end, especially when some really sensitive and financially really heavy decisions had to be made, from shipbuilding industry to some other aspects. So then, of course, this turned out maybe not, I cannot say disillusion, but maybe less favorable atmosphere was in the public for the accession.
And so for those areas in which Croatia had met the benchmarks, was there an impetus basically to meet popular expectations by pushing for accelerated integration?
Yes, I mean, we especially now, I think I can praise this document now, New Growth Plan for the Western Balkans, in a sense that firstly it's consulted with the countries that are in question, so they can have their saying in what they want. And secondly, when I look from Croatia's side, and something that it's actually mentioned in this document, is that there is a possibility for them to participate in the working groups of the European Commission, which I think is really important and crucial, because one thing for us was to, harmonize legislation, but another thing, and most important one, to fulfill benchmarks, was actually to implement the legislation and all those reforms. So in that sense, I think that's one of the crucial elements that I would definitely suggest that it exists for the in this phase for the Western Balkan 6.
Yeah, okay. It would be up to spin doctors to see whether that would raise enough political capital to match expectations of citizens. The mere participation in expert groups of the European Commission, but that's up for debate perhaps later. Maryna. Obviously, Ukraine's armed forces are the most battle-hardened in Europe these days. We've had statements also that Ukraine might become the arsenal of the rest of Europe or the free world. There's, of course, an industrial capacity which is quickly being built up in several areas. And so I wonder whether in security and defense in particular, Ukraine has something to offer to the European Union, which is long and hard in the making, and whether accelerated integration might therefore be a pathway, in particular this area, where there's a mutual benefit to be tapped.
Yeah. Thank you very much for the question. And indeed, unfortunately, to many of us, and as a Ukrainian citizen, I think I have full right to say that that armed forces and defense capacity is something that Ukraine is already offering to Europe and will be offering to Europe for a long time. And it's also very much the situation where Europe has to make a choice about an extent to which it would like to invest into Ukraine, also as a security and defense hub, let us say. And I see two challenging moments in this regard, maybe even three. So the first one to say is about vision, about where Europe sees Ukraine in this regard and also sees itself in security and defense, because I think also in one of the most recent communications, Borrell was arguing that Europe is not a defense union, and it's a question about an extent to which Europe wants to be a defense union and how the European strategic autonomy will develop. So I think now there is a bit of a threat that strategic autonomy is becoming a buzzword and everyone is using strategic autonomy everywhere in all kind of contexts, instead of focusing on the original idea and Europe's ability to defend itself independently on what's happening in the United States. And I think now when we are all watching the election process in the US and let's say the preparation for the election process, again, we come to the same question as to whether Europe is ready to defend itself. Probably now the answer would be no, if we see how Russia is building up its capacities, and despite all the initial very brave ideas that Russia is unprepared, it failed its invasion in Ukraine and so on. First, there had been a lot of euphoria also in Ukraine about how unprepared Russia is, but Russia is learning, and not having European strategic autonomy is really a threat. However, I don't see that in Europe there is a very strong consensus on strong strategic autonomy. So this is the first challenging moment with where accelerated integration and Ukraine come. The second one is about the ENP and its origins itself, because ENP wasn't designed initially and has never been an instrument of building some security and defense union that would bring together EU member states and neighbors. And therefore, if we compare it, for example, with single market integration, in single market we see the path forward, I think, more clearly than in security and defense. There have been instruments, conditionalities, ways forward, and so on. In security and defense, Europe is building up itself, Ukraine is building up itself, the war is going on, and we still need to find this match against all these backgrounds with not so many predefined recipes as we have it in the single market domain. And last but not least, about the threat of politicization and this kind of substitution of accelerated integration, using accelerated integration as a way to substitute full integration. This is something particularly easy in security and defense domain because it is very much in the making, but fully agree with what Ivana Klimpush-Tsintsadze said about this, that there could be always some leeway and some room of maneuver for some member states, I would name them, that are not very much in favor of Ukraine coming closer, and that's why this accelerated integration also has a chance to become kind of a sham for non-integration or for some artificial deadlocks. And these kind of deadlocks are very dangerous, particularly in security and defense. First, because the war is still ongoing, and the longer the war goes, the more hope it's also in Russia that in some way, maybe by making Europe tired, by promoting the sense that it's not possible to win from Russia, Russia can somehow win. And this is indeed challenging, and this will raise, we see already how this changed this year compared to last year, the rhetoric about negotiations and so on. So these may also become a trap for Ukraine's security and defense integration. So what to do? I think, however, that in legal terms, there are still quite many formats where Ukraine can fit, and just be brief listing them. First of all, the European Defense Agency. Ukraine has an administrative agreement with the Defense Agency. However, in strategic terms, there are still instruments of long-term planning where Ukraine can fit. For example, when we come to cards, to coordinate annual review on defense plans, the capability development plan, and overarching strategic research agenda. So it's very important that Europe sees how its capabilities looks like and also takes into account the development of capabilities in Ukraine and brings these processes in line. So Ukraine gets so much aid currently, and there is so much momentum for building up defense industry that's very important to align the capabilities. Secondly, the European Defense Fund could have also been an option. However, Ukraine is not an associated partner in terms of this EDF regulation. However, in case the legal changes are implemented, there are still opportunities to go forward with this, and Ukrainian defense startups and defense companies can work together with European ones in order to develop ambitious joint projects. Also, Ukraine, I think, has been known for creativity during the war, so we have been using some things for purposes entirely different from original ones, renovating some missiles the way they weren't previously used, using a lot, for example, the quite cheap FPV drones and so on and so forth. So these kind of projects can also have an element of creativity that is currently being developed at the battlefield. And here, a little bit of challenge can come from the fact that there may be not so many contacts between industry players in Europe and Ukraine. Also, probably some industry players in Europe may be hesitant to develop these new contacts and and sharing such sensitive issues with Ukrainian ones. And I think here some experiences from other domains, from matchmaking in business, also in education, in research, like even our Horizon Europe experience is something that can be utilized to develop the European Defense Fund. And last but not least, I'll be very brief on hybrid threats. I think we shouldn't forget that the contemporary security threats are not just those on the battlefield, but it's important for the EU to integrate Ukraine into its efforts to counter hybrid threats. For example, when it comes to media manipulation and disinformation, such a task force was established under the strategic compass, and also several first, I think, if I'm not mistaken, just the first report was issued where Russia and China were mentioned as the main sources of manipulation and disinformation. And I think here is also the place and issue where Ukraine could contribute a lot, also given the language knowledge, given the experience, a lot of direct experience with Russian disinformation. So just to give you a very brief example, quite recently the Vice PM for European Integration, Stefanishina, commented about the law of minorities in Ukraine, saying that there is no Russian minority in Ukraine. Russia said immediately, Stefanishina reported to the EU that the genocide of Russian-speaking population is over and successfully completed. So we are touched by disinformation every day, every moment, every time I'm on Twitter, I see a lot of this. And I think this is also one of the aspects where Ukraine can be really useful and our experience can be really useful. Similar comes to many other aspects of protection from hybrid threats. Let us think of just critical infrastructure protection, of all the attacks on energy infrastructure we are going through for already quite a while, and these experiences of protecting infrastructure also physically are very important for EU to learn from, so that it also knows much about the tactics that is being used by Russia. So I think in both practical terms and legal terms, there are many avenues where Ukraine can come into. However, it's very important that all these practical cooperations and accelerated integration doesn't overshadow the overall goal of Ukraine becoming an EU member and the absence of these security gray zones in Europe.
Thanks a lot, Maryna. That's a strong argument, of course. A concern which will linger in the back of the heads of member state leaders and officials is, of course, the issue of trust and confidentiality of sharing information. And could be a potential, barrier to institutional participation. if and when, you know, the rules of procedures or the statutes of the EU's institutions and bodies allow for it. But I would like to park that issue just for a moment, also to give some food for thought to the audience, and have a quick second round before we open it up, to deepen our knowledge basically on some of these aspects. In particular, Thomas, as far as the growth plan and the mechanics there are concerned, there are 7 initial priority areas of the single market which have been identified. You refer to some: free movement of goods, which requires, you know, participation in the Common Transit Convention and some other preconditions. The free movement of services, but very limited, if I can say so, e-commerce related services primarily. In the digital market, which is an area that is budding within the European Union itself, there is a whole list of concrete areas where accelerated integration could be achieved, with or without, you know, additional agreements that would have to be negotiated and ratified, might I add, or indeed annexes to the stabilization and association agreements being updated. There is emphasis on facilitation of transport, which could be channeled through the existing transport community. Same for decarbonization of the economy, where through the energy community, where Western Balkan countries and Ukraine and Moldova already participate, you know, more work could be done. I don't see that particularly innovative in and of itself. Where I do think the needle can move a lot in real terms is on opening up the single Eurozone payments area, so as to those countries, facilitate our accelerated integration, so that money which is currently held in banks or retained by banks making the transactions in different currency denominations, of course, might play up. I'm thinking, you're probably Austrian, Thomas. Mm. I'm thinking about some banks from your home country that have a large stake in that market, which would no doubt, raise hell, to put it mildly, against this proposal. Nevertheless, it would have tangible results, visible to the citizens, reflecting, a mood basically for reforms and stimulating it. Still, my question to you is: you mentioned, okay, there was a stakeholder conversation. These areas were clearly identified as priority areas, which suggests that there might be spillovers later on and widen up. But then you also said it would be accompanied by implementation of action plans, the current one and a new one which needs to be agreed to after 24, for the common regional market. Accompanied, you said. Or is it rather that the common regional market and the Western Balkans adherence to the implementation of the plan there is a precondition to tap into the benefits of gradual or accelerated integration into the single market sectors which have been identified now? Let me put it more sharply still. Is the common regional market, which is external to the EU, in fact a laboratory where we want to see as member states, full functioning happening first before access to those parts of the single market which have been identified can be secured? Mm.
Thanks, Stephen. I'll try to be not too technical in some of the responses, because it's a very technical issue. The single market by essence is technical, and how we are going to organize this is even more technical given the legal constraints. But first, the areas. The areas, as you said, they have been identified together with the countries of the region. Now, take what's sort of the difference to the past, and that it boils down to what we discussed before, the also motivation of for example, of the administration, civil servants, citizens. Take the single euro payment area. In the past, the way we would have done it, in any case, the countries would have to align to the EU payments acquis. There's a lot of acquis in this area, very technical acquis. What would have happened? We would have opened and then closed this chapter, right? But nothing would have happened in the real world, except there would have been an accession conference in Brussels, which would have opened and closed this chapter. Now the idea is, if the same work is being done or has been done by the administration, by the countries, because it involves the parliaments a lot. The work of parliaments is key in this key alignment process. We could have an actual real world result and saying, now as this has been done, the country is being put into into a single euro payment area, which again is a complicated example because strictly formally speaking, it's not the EU as such, it's the European Payment Council, but that's another matter. But that's sort of the underlying logic of why we are doing it. Now, the link to the common regional market. I mean, again, if you strip it down to the basics, the logic is to say, look, why should we open as EU the single market unless you, in that case, the Western Balkans, do not open it to the other 5 of EU. That's the essence of the political logic, and some of the areas very much reflect already the logic where regional integration has been taking place within the region, like roaming, and where we're now trying to extend it. And we're trying to do the same in a number of other areas. It might look a bit limited, like in the recognition of professional qualifications, etc., where the region has agreed to do that, to recognize professional qualifications, to make it easier for, Albanian doctors to work in Serbia and the other way around. And then also to try and recognize that from the EU side and create this link. So it's not a laboratory, as you call it, from the way we see it. We see the economic logic of it. We see it's an additional push to overcome some of the obstacles of the common regional market, because if let's be clear, the common regional market doesn't function as well as we would like it to function, it's because of the Serbia-Kosovo issue, which blocks the further progress on this. That's why it's also part of the conditions under the reform facility. Now, on the single market, and then I'll finish with that. I mean, the single market, if you talk, and we're also celebrating anniversaries, 30 years of the single market. Now, the single market in many, and I think it's been mentioned this morning as well, people take us seriously as EU because we have a functioning single market. This is the crown jewel, in a way, of the EU's integration. So I'm just saying that because we've just gone through the experience of trying to identify areas where this single market can be opened. I can tell you it is not easy. It is not easy. There is a lot of pushback. It's very technical. It's very demanding. And people are always concerned about level playing field, about the same rules, enforcement, etc. So these are the overall constraints amongst which we are operating. Not to speak of the fact that there are certain areas. I give you one example. I was speaking about my compatriots as well. As you said, my compatriots are jumping up and down about gradual integration. They're not the only ones. Okay. Now, one of the areas where the region is particularly interested is road transport liberalization, right? Because right now we have the transport community which liberalizes rail transport. Now, road transport is extremely competitive. It's been wiped out of Western Europe. I simplify already. All the operators are in Eastern Europe, and therefore you can imagine the enthusiasm it raises when you speak about road transport liberalization with a number of member states, and not only the one I used to know best. So these are the practicalities as well that are involved, and it's not about. It's not only what I'm trying to say. It's not about it's sort of easy for some of our member states to discuss it in abstract. Let's do more gradual integration or accelerated integration, whatever then the terminology is. But behind these are real interests and economic issues as well. It's not obvious to sometimes to address this. One final remark on the 7 areas. I mean, one we've also foreseen the possibilities that we amend the SAAs, the Stabilization and Association Agreements, with the Western Balkans, with a sort of a general clause which would mirror what we have in the DCFTAs, which would allow the Association Council to kind of export the acquis, if you wish, sort of to make it binding on both the EU it is already, and on the candidate countries, allowing the integration. So this will be another of our upcoming proposals. And again, it's about creating a level playing field between the various enlargement countries we currently have, but also allowing to recognize work in terms of alignment already during the process. And again, just to highlight for us, this is not an alternative. It's not instead of enlargement. It is really meant to accelerate the accession path.
Yeah, good to preempt a question which might come in that regard. Mirna, I don't want to put you on the spot, but one of the rationales, as exposed also by Thomas, of this growth plan is to close the economic gap which exists between a median member state and that of the Western Balkan 6. And Thomas, you'll forgive me if I quote from the plan. You know, there's some rather boisterous language. I would suggest, and I would simply quote it. The Commission expects basically that, combined with the funds under the proposed facility and the 2 billion in grants and the 4 billion in soft loans, and the money which is still available under the current instrument for pre-accession, the third iteration of that, until the end of the current MFF, so in the next 3 years, that's combined, the facility would provide the Western Balkans with, quote, roughly the same aid intensity per inhabitant as cohesion policy does on average in the EU, unquote, and, quote, help the region to achieve its full potential in terms of economic and social development capacity compared to EU member states by 2030, unquote. Okay, that's highly ambitious, if you would ask me, but Mirna, I ask you, you're representing a neighboring country, and so you can tell us a little bit about economic convergence or divergence as it has happened in the past and as you would expect it under the growth plan. How do you see this panning out?
Well, I guess we have to look at this in the context of the current negotiations about the existing MFF. But I just wanted to go maybe a bit backwards. Just linking to this, of course, is that during the accession negotiations and with the funding that Croatia had available through IPA, first subpart and other programs, but then IPA in the end, we realized that a lot of the financial constraints were made on our national budget. So therefore, we really, especially in the second phases of the negotiations and in pre-accession phase, we relied on the EU funding extremely. So looking at this proposal and also knowing the allocations that are put here forward, and as Thomas highlighted in the introduction, like 6 billion versus 50 billion for Ukraine, this is not enough. And I would say, maybe from my personal perspective, that the time frame even to put 2030 maybe not be so favorable in this sense, because with the adaptation and how the process will be proceeding, it's really hard to state that maybe this will be achieved by then, by that time. So in that sense, I think it's better to also think about the future financial framework, because this is going to be something that is going to be negotiated next year. We have elections and everything changes in the Commission. So I think we should definitely look in the future more. I mean, this is the amount of money that is proposed now, and in current situation, I would assume that this is the best that we can get at this point. But I think also in the future financial framework, we should look for more.
Yeah. In a paper which came out yesterday with the Stockholm Center for East European Studies, and Hugo van Esten is in the back of the room, we did a back of the envelope type of calculation as to what, based on Croatia's cohesion receipts in 2022, which were 1.2 billion euros, and which we scaled up basically for the population size of the Western Balkans, so 17.3 million according to Eurostat figures at the moment, which would give the 6 Western Balkan states roughly 5.3 billion euros, and then with the current IPA 3 amounts, an annual 2 billion basically would be added. If we come to the crunch line or to the bottom line calculations, I think the facility, if and when agreed and if and when properly implemented, will narrow the gap, the gap of economic divergence which exists, but it won't address it by 2027. So what you say is indeed absolutely key. A new financial instrument should be bigger first, and it should encompass, of course, as Thomas also alluded to, the type of conditionality which has been upgraded in the Ukraine facility, as well as the new reform and growth facility for the Western Balkans.
Stephen, can I just come in just one moment? Because, of course, you can say, I take the point, it could always be bigger in terms of volume, but I think we need to, if we take a step back, it is extremely rare that the Commission even proposes to revise the MFF mid-term, and I can tell you member states are not at all thrilled by this, and this is across the board. Now, it is impossible not to do it because of Ukraine. That's where we have to do it, where we had to reopen the MFF, and that's how we intend to fund the Ukraine facility. But it's quite an extraordinary step, and this is what I would just like to highlight, that in the middle of the MFF, we are, as Commission, proposing a new financial instrument, and even if it's only, where to comma, 6 billion, it shouldn't be underestimated, and I can tell you we are not being greeted with standing ovations in the Council. I mean, everybody agrees that the idea as such is good, but, in terms of the money, we are not there yet. Again, we are confident that when EU member states come together at the highest political level in December, that they will see the rationale and come around that it is in fact a good idea, not only in theory but also needs to be funded. But it's not obvious. But of course, we will see how this works in practice, because we will have to prepare new financial instruments for the next multi-annual financial framework, which starts in 28, but which basically means it needs to be prepared as of 25. So it's not that far away. So this is the time horizon.
Yeah, of course, a lot is riding on the MFF review, on the European Council as well. One particular member state, somewhere in Central Europe, which has been an obstructor on rule of law reform issues for quite a while, has resisted, of course, any substantial reform under a similar type of arrangement, a next generation EU instrument, and might now cynically use the upcoming negotiations in the December Council to actually obtain concessions by the rest of the Union on that front, thereby eroding the very operational logic that is ingrained in both the Ukraine facility and the reform and growth facility. So I think it's absolutely key that the member states, the other member states, hold on to this conditionality, or there's a set of dominoes which risks to fall. Still, one point before I open it up to the room, and Maryna, I'll come back to you in that discussion round, is I quoted from the European Council conclusions from June 2022, where the European Council called on the Commission, the Council and the High Representative to come up with ideas for gradual integration already during accession talks in a reversible and merit-based manner. Now, Thomas, in passing, you mentioned to the fact that if in the current proposal of the growth plan, if one of the Western Balkan 6 doesn't play ball in implementing its CRM, Common Regional Market Action Plan, it should not expect to receive the benefits which under this new facility, and that they might be rediverted basically to some of the other countries. That is not really less for less conditionality. I mean, it's money that is not, it's hanging there, but it's not taken away from the country, nor do I see, for the moment at least, an element of reversibility included in the proposal, in the enlargement communication as such. Am I wrong? Did I miss something? If I'm not wrong, is work ongoing to redress this issue?
On the money side, I'm not sure I would agree the way that there is no reversibility, because once the instrument is adopted, and again it's a proposal, it needs the approval Council and Parliament, but there will be country envelopes, and there'll be a reform agenda with a price tag attached to it. So the country, the public will know how much money is in a way available. And then if this, so it's not in terms of, legally speaking, you're right, this money has not been transferred, but I think politically there is a commitment this would be the money available. However, that is reversible. If these reforms are not being implemented, the money will not flow, and it will be redistributed to the other countries of the region. So I think on the money side, I'm quite confident that we can, that this fulfills as well the element of reversibility. On the single market side, we will still have to look into it. It's complex, and you didn't miss anything. The whole thing is 1,500 pages, but this is not spelled out yet in any detail somewhere. I mean, we will see what kind of clauses we can put in, but we just also need to be aware that there is a lot of ex ante conditionality already, technically speaking, because the single market rules need to be in place. Number one, and number two, regional integration needs to be there. We also must not overload the boat in a way, in that sense, because the acquis or the single market, it's not like a tap of water. You can switch it on and off as much as people would probably like it, saying now you're, because we like what you're doing, now we get you into the single market, and tomorrow because you're doing something we like less, we switch it off again. That's unfortunately or fortunately not the way the single market works. It's about laws, it's about agreements, etc., which are not that easy to change.
Okay. I would like to turn it to you, dear members of the audience, and so catch my eye. If you would like to make a question or observation, you caught my eye, definitely. Anyone else? There's still time. And Jorida, I would certainly like to ask you as well, after the gentleman who first raised his hand, to come in on some of the potential that you see, but also some of the limits, basically, in absorbing, the financial, investments which are ready to be made. Please identify. No, you yourself. Identify yourself. There's a roaming microphone. And if you have a specific question for any of the panelists, please indicate so.
Yeah, thank you very much. My name is Piotr Kobza, and I'm Deputy Director for CFSP. and enlargement in the Polish MFA. Very quick comment and one question, and the question will be more actually to the candidate countries than to you panelists. But first of all, congratulations on this idea of gradual integration for the Western Balkans, because this is something we have been waiting for a very long time. This is my country actually opted for a very, very long time. Although we have the impression that there is nothing new. I was actually there at the Polish enlargement negotiations as a very young diplomat. And I remember this gradual integration with opening up of the single market as an idea of the association agreement that we signed in the early 90s. So there is this very good element of the sectoral integration, and there is the very good element and very important element of the institutional integration, which I can declare safely from the part of Poland that we will be promoting during our presidency and during everything we do in the Council. Because the idea of, taking the states, the applicants on board for where it is possible is very good actually to council formats as observers, to working groups, etc., etc. So this is very good, and this was the logic of Eastern Partnership as well. Of DCFTA, because I slightly disagree with the notion that the DCFTA for Ukraine was an alternative for enlargement. No, we didn't perceive this as an alternative for enlargement as in Warsaw. It was tacitly, everyone knows that, tacitly seen as a step towards the enlargement, actually, although it was not perhaps in the papers. But the question, very simple question, and the question is more to the candidates countries. How do you like this idea about gradual integration? And I'm asking this question for the very specific reason, because I've been hearing lots of skepticism over the years about, you remember the NATO and Partnership for Peace issue. So we have been hearing messages like, no, wir brauchen keinen Ersatz. We don't need any Ersatz, to any replacement for the full real membership. So the issue is how do people react politically in the candidates countries. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. And I think you can pass on the microphone immediately to Jorida, who will give you an answer, and maybe also her reflections. Before I pass it on to Glenn and anyone else that wants to come in, please catch my eye.
First of all, two comments. Since Drita is not here from North Macedonia, North Macedonia has gone above and beyond, more than any other country. They've changed the name. They have waited for 18 years in this process, and I believe that also bilateral disputes in this regard, stopping them for a couple of years in the process. And I believe that a positive signal to the people of the country should be given. Hoping that this would not happen to Albania because of bilateral disputes now. The discussion now is becoming very good and very concrete on what we see in enlargement countries. First of all, I do not believe that there is an alternative to enlargement, and stage accession or whatever comes in the way can be used as a motivation for the moment because the final decision is not being taken. But that cannot last forever. So a political decision at the end of the day has to be taken. The growth plan was a positive signal. The example that Thomas gave was very, very practical. But if we fulfill with the legislation of the single payment area, all the region. If we do all our duties and reforms in the countries, what happens if negotiations are not open and we are not yet part of the institutions? It is good that the growth plan is now focusing on a regional approach, on approximating the economic differences. Albania, in terms of GDP per capita, in terms of minimal wage, in terms of median wage, is very low compared to EU. And those 10 long years of waiting have not helped the country to improve. So the growth plan will give a motivation, it will be a boost in this regard. But the approach is totally different from the previous approach, which our countries were not absorbing funds. I used to be NIPAC when Stephen was in the Ministry of European Integration a long time ago, and we were not able to profit from all EU assistance. We will not be able also to profit from all the funds coming from the Berlin process. Also, all the help and support coming from the Commission. So this regional approach with the growth plan and distribution of funds based on reforms, I believe it's a very strategic, thinking-wise, good development, but for the medium term. For the long term, there is no discussion that a decision needs to be taken. The region needs to advance as a whole, and the perspective, I believe, also of our economies will change in the meantime. Croatia has been an excellent example in the region. We took from Croatia the model of engaging in a National Council for European Integration, sitting all political parties there, all independent institutions, so we all engage to commit to reforms, because at the end of the day, the government can propose laws, but some of them have to be approved with a qualified majority in our parliaments. And these instruments are helping to show the political engagement of all sides. There are some good things happening, but still the region is not progressing as a whole. The qualification of diplomas, doctors, nurses, 7 of them have been signed in 2 summits, in Tirana in December and now in October. There are 300 professional qualifications to be approximated. Imagine the process. There is an agreement for ID recognition in the region, but some of the parliaments have not approved it. Bosnia and Herzegovina, Serbia are not implementing it. This is why the political decision for starting negotiation of chapters, for opening of chapters, I believe that it will also unlock some of this potential that has not been used because of course, some specifics of the region.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Jurida, for clarifying that. And if I may extend one element, which is in the criticism of some of civil society organizations in the region also mentioned, is that the type of grants or budget support that might be delivered to rent-seeking politicians is perhaps not, the best way of stimulating reforms. We know that there are, barriers put to that in the growth plan. Financial accountability, it's safeguarding financial interests of the European Union ultimately. But indeed, the proof will be in the pudding. I will just highlight still that in terms of qualifications, of course, and accelerated integration, it's fantastic that the 3rd campus of the College of Europe will be opened in Tirana, so as to facilitate, also this capacity build-up. And on capacity build-up, I would maybe complement, the difficulties that an accelerated integration model might pose for administrations in the candidate countries, but equally so for the European Commission, I would add. We have 2 people who want to come in. Klen, yes, please introduce yourself.
Thank you very much, Stephen. And I'm Klen Järts. I'm from the Government Office of Estonia. I wanted to provoke a little Thomas. As you know, we not only practice gradual integration, and gradual integration is actually well and alive. If one read the German-French paper on the EU reforms, the different speeds Europe idea is well and alive in the core European countries. But we practiced also gradual disintegration. can we reverse this for the gradual integration? What I mean is Brexit. We offered everything but institutions. So what we said is that it's legally possible. It's legally possible to define the core, ECJ, jurisprudence, acceptance of the acquis, and we could do this in reverse. So, I mean, I understand the starting point for the Britain was full European Union and then slowly going somewhere else. But we could offer this to everyone else. It's legally at least possible. Have you studied the idea that we can do reverse Brexit as a form of integration? Of course, I think it's a bad idea because I think we have this unique opportunity for one direction and 5-year plan and until 2030. And this is a unique opportunity to mobilize the enlargement effort. But we can do this. Legally, you said it's possible. You said it's possible to be almost a member without the seat at the table. That's with Brexit. We offered them everything. They actually didn't want it, but we offered them.
And could you pass the microphone to the other side of the aisle? Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Christophe Fillon from the University of Oslo. Thank you very much to all the panelists for a very stimulating debate and under the superb chairmanship of Steven. I have a question about the document of the European Commission suggesting that there may be an increasing inclusiveness within the institutions of the EU, representative of the candidate at expert levels. I'm interested to know a little bit more about that because the document is not very specific. Obviously, I come from Norway, and there is a model for that, and which is the EEA, where Norwegian representatives do take part in expert meetings in the European Commission in the context of the EEA, in the Council, in the context of Schengen. Is this what the Commission had in mind in coming up with this idea of institutional inclusion, albeit progressive? Footnote: I would dare say that this is an excellent idea. It's finally teaching the candidate states to be operational member state, i.e. developing their own views about the lawmaking process of the EU, taking positions on important policy choices. And so it definitely contributes to the future absorption capacity of the EU. So such an inclusion should be deeply encouraged and developed. But the terms obviously will have to be worked out. And the document of the Commission, which could be welcome, is not particularly precise on that issue.
Mm. Okay. Quick scan still in the room. Nothing? Okay. Thomas, I'll put it first back to you since there were direct questions to you, but I would like to invite also Maryna to reflect on the last issue in combination with what I said before. Participation in council bodies in particular is fraught with all kinds of difficulties. And in the area of security and defense, of course, that might limit, therefore, also the accelerated integration. But first, Thomas.
Brexit. I prefer to talk about Article 49 and not Article 50. Yeah, 49 is the forward-looking positive. The other one is the back door out. Well, I'm not entirely sure I get exactly the where you want to get at. Just some reflections, just and just take it as personal reflections. But I mean, some of the elements that have come up in the discussion with the UK, for example, the indivisibility of the 4 freedoms, are an issue when we're discussing opening the single market to the Western Balkans. So that's, we are facing this as an approach as well. So this is why we are trying to avoid as well this terminology, and we are focusing on certain priority areas. I mean, again, on the single market, and Stephen, we have had this discussion a lot of times. I think on the single market, there are always 2 issues and 2 dimensions, and both of them are extremely complicated, I'm afraid. One is the legal side, to have, even if politically we wish one thing, one is the legal side. The single market basically works, single market, single set of rules, single set of enforcement, including the European Court of Justice. That needs to be organized. Unless you have this, You know, you don't have a level playing field. The single market doesn't work, and those already participating are very reluctant to go into it. And then where does the single market end? Because it's not just the full freedom, so you'll immediately get into the discussion avoiding social, environmental dumping. So then you get all of this legislation in there. So, you know, that's just on the institutional side or on the legal side. And then the other element is, and that's the more economic side, I mean, the single market also, let's face it, I'm speaking here specifically about the Western Balkans, but I mean, it's a similar argument can be made on the East. You know, Ukraine is a bit of a specific case, but still, if you look at economic criteria in this year's report, it's not, you know, you see a lot of challenges across the countries. The single market, you know, if you now were to right now open and have some of the countries, let's say of the Western Balkans, part of the single market, this will not be to the benefit of these countries. It's not that service providers from Montenegro would invade the single market. It would obviously be the other way around if you open completely the services market. So there is an element of competitiveness that needs to be taken into account, and that's why we've also looked at these priority areas with this in mind, which are sort of the areas where the countries have an interest and are competitive. On participation on the institutional side, participation in the various expert groups, but also on the council side. I mean, because that's not only an issue for the Commission in a way. I think politically the most important ones, I think, are the participations in council at political levels. To have these regular exchanges, I think it's key, it's important, and also. I think High Rep Borrell made some proposals recently in the area of foreign policy, etc., to have this more regularly. We have this in some areas. We have it in the area of justice and home affairs. We have it in the area of the economy. We transport, energy are specific areas, but I think it needs to be, or it should be more generalized. There is always this red line in terms of decision making, where we very clear. This is also what we have gotten in response from the council whenever we've made this point in the past. On the Commission side, we're also quite open to integrate, and if there is candidate countries, again, all 10, when there is. When they are either participating in certain programs or already have aligned to the acquis because of also under the association agreements. So we'll try and go forward. It's not easy to develop an overall doctrine, sort of saying again, this, because you've done something, you participate as a general level, because in some countries already participate as they're part of the customs union, because of the DCFTAs, etc., in certain areas. And just the last point, and this again is about administrative capacities. I mean, sometimes people don't, see this as when people talk about expert groups for the Commission. I mean, there are many different groups, but if expert groups for the Commission, they're actually meant to advise the Commission with technical expertise. So they are not meant to be necessarily member states representatives or countries representatives. They're meant to provide expertise that the Commission is looking for. So, what I'm saying, there needs to be also an added value in the sense, and there is of course a challenge as well on this. I absolutely agree that the part of the process of kind of Europeanizing an administration needs to be done gradual. Otherwise, it takes a lot of time afterwards. But there is also an issue of capacity, and we have seen it in the past. I mean, we have, after a lot of efforts, when during the middle of the COVID crisis, managed to have the enlargement countries participate in the EU Health Committee. Did they show up? I spare you the details, but I mean, of course, it's understandable. They were busy as well, and some of them showed up. All credit to them. But it's just an issue of, it's not just, how should I say, a political choice. I mean, if you have a couple of health officials who are busy in managing a health crisis in their country, they're not necessarily then attending the health security committee in Brussels. It doesn't prevent then prime ministers of saying we need to have this politically, but there is an objective limit as well on administrative capacities.
Thanks. Maryna.
Okay, so thank you for the questions, and I'll be brief, and I'll try to connect the very first question about the perceptions of candidate states regarding accelerated integration and the institutional aspects. So I think we should really take account of what people think and of public perceptions of the EU integration process, because this is something that will influence in candidate states also the elections, the decision-making in the future, and so on. And therefore, I think we need good news and good narratives that are sellable, let us say, in candidate countries. Because just to make one example, as a scholar of EU studies with kind of a knowledge of differentiated integration and all these legal instruments, constellations, and so on, I could be very happy to hear that Ukraine is represented here and there at this institutional body, and this one may be joining the European Defence Agency, but the layman, let us say, wouldn't. And for keeping public opinion strong on the EU and keeping the belief in the EU and keeping the, let us say, the momentum that we have now, it's very important to have some concrete benchmarks and that could be also perceived as tangible benefits by Ukrainian citizens, by Moldovan citizens, and so on. And I have read quite much about the disillusionment in the Balkans, and this is something I think that can be the problem in Ukraine and Moldova much more strongly, also given the war and all the grievances people go through. And now they feel it. The EU kind of responded to our call, but what if we are staying with the same views of Ukraine joined this committee, Moldova joined that committee in 10 years when we celebrate 20th anniversary from the Euromaidan, not the 10th one. So still, I think the full integration is very important, and we shouldn't develop substitutes and shouldn't be very mean on these small steps. Yes, they are very important in technical terms, but in political terms and also in how we narrate our hopefully success story, we need to be focusing on the full accession, because otherwise it will be always a lot of leeway for pro-Russian politicians, for openly pro-Russian, tacitly pro-Russian, and those representing other actual potential dictatorship to play with it and say, okay, it takes years, you see the EU, they don't have will, they can always integrate you here and there, it doesn't bring anything. And that's why we really need to be tangible and concrete, because now we are competing.
Yeah, a point which has resonated, Mirna, also during other discussions, the need for the connection between the accelerated integration methodology is now proposed, and of course the ongoing or future enlargement negotiations on a chapter-by-chapter basis. Or should we just more radically get rid of all the chapters and return to a system whereby a unanimous vote is taken by the member states to open accession negotiations and to close them, and to leave it to the European Commission to accelerate integration methodology, without a clear chapter-based structure. Here I'm teasing, of course.
Yeah, of course, because in Croatian case, this would be much more helpful, and we would be proceeding even faster if we could avoid certain phases. But I just wanted to say for the end that there is no alternative for the full membership. And I think in that sense, it's we should, from Croatian perspective, when we speak about enlargement, primarily to our heads, it's always Western Balkans. But of course, we work closely with Ukraine and Moldova and Georgia all this time. Then one really pragmatic thing also, which is really important, is that the funding that is going to be available, regardless of the sum in the end, it should be used in a really pragmatic way and really focused. So my worry maybe a bit with this new facility is how this would, I mean, from the operational side, as I was working on that, like how this would fit with the accession process itself and opening and closing chapters, because this, I think, for the administration of the candidates is going to be really important. And also in terms of the role of all the stakeholders. I mean, many times in the region, in the Western Balkans, we hear like we are waiting and nothing happens. But I think we should always stress that it's, you know, three-way process. It's member states, it's commission, but it's also the candidates. And I think this is also something that we strongly emphasize, and we are ready to assist them in this process. But in like for teasing, I would agree this would definitely be much helpful.
Okay, my main takeaway from this conversation is that indeed accelerated integration, as is now being proposed on by the European Commission in the growth plan, is a good idea. Some of the mechanics still clearly need to be worked out. But coming back to Maryna's point, it's and what we've heard in the first panel, it's absolutely key to keep, well, the momentum going. And so with an election year at European level ahead, I think it would be incumbent on the outgoing European Commission, which, according to von der Leyen in her speech of September, State of the Union address, is preparing basically an ex-ante impact assessment of future enlargement on the institutional architecture, procedures, and policies of the European Union. That this exercise is then combined with, the detail which is currently still missing from the revised or tweaked enlargement methodology itself, which then as a package would feed into council negotiations ongoing on the strategic plan for the next policy and legislative cycle, and feed also into, of course, the hearings of the Commission, the next Commission President designate and individual proposed commissions. I think that would be keeping up the European political momentum, at least on this level, but it requires a further encouragement of the European Commission to present all that in spring of next year, and not to wait until the next Commission is in place, which might be a year from now, until it finds its feet, another couple of months before actually this proposition is made. So that would be, Thomas, my takeaway from this conversation, and also a message to you and your colleagues back in Brussels. On your behalf, I would like to warmly thank all of our speakers, members of the audience who intervened, for a very enlightening, if technical indeed, debate. It goes to show that the geopolitical and the technical indeed need to be matched, and that there's an urgent need for it. Thank you very much for your expertise and opinions.